Get ready. You are about to experience the life science effect. The most influential players in biotech, pharma, and medical device, bringing you their insights and inspirational stories. Are you ready to boost your career? Ready to set your medical innovation in motion? You have arrived at the right place. Every week, another industry leader, more insights, more inspiration, and tips you can implement right away to make your mark on the world. Hello there, it's Steve Vinson. What you're about to hear is part 2 of my conversation with Kyle Keeney, the entrepreneur in residence at Elevate Ventures. If you haven't heard part 1, I would suggest you go check it out. But if you don't have time to go check out part 1, feel free to listen to part 2. No spoilers. You should be able to pick it up without having heard the first part. The second part is actually the part where I normally come back from break, and you'll hear me saying we are going to wrap it up with just a few questions, but then it went on for a good 20-25 minutes. Kyle and I talk about all sorts of stuff. You'll see how wise Kyle is and just how a man of the world he is. Great father, well-read, a great philosopher, and a wonderful entrepreneur. So without further ado, stay tuned. Here is part 2 of Kyle Keeney. And welcome back. We're still here with Kyle Keeney, the entrepreneur in residence at Elevate Ventures. Just a few more questions. We'll wrap things up. First of all, is there anything that you wanted to tell us, but I didn't ask the right question?
No, I love where we were headed, which is, this idea about looking back in time and then looking at those cities that are successes now.
Yes.
Right. What is, we're in the middle of, and hopefully not at the end of the longest stock market rally, right? Mm-hmm. We've had this incredible run since 2010. And what communities have capitalized on that? And what are those catalysts and elements in those communities that actually made a difference? It's not just the money, but it's the other things. And like I said, if there was one magic wand sort of wish that I had in it, it was impact the educational system and impact it specifically at an earlier and earlier age, and impact it in a meaningful way that gives kids a vision about what entrepreneurship is. Yeah. I'm sure my father would have said, that it was giving them better financial acumen at an earlier age, which is something I didn't have.
Yeah, but I sure wish I had that.
Yeah, I still wish I had that. But my father, I always laugh. I come from this small rural community, and Dad was a banker, and I go off to college, and my father's all elated that I'm going to college. He says, well, what are you going to major in? And I said, well, I'm going to be an art major. And, and that was coronary number 1. And then, I go off and I study in Italy and study painting, and I come back and he says, I said, Dad, well, I figured out I don't want to be an artist as a vocation. I want it to be avocational. He said, well, good, so you're going to change your major. And I said, yes. And he says, all right, so what are you going to do now? And I said, well, I'm going to be a philosophy major. And that right was coronary number 2. But all of those things over time sort of fed this entrepreneurial curiosity that culminated in a PhD and got us out to Silicon Valley, where you saw that intersection between the youthful enthusiasm, a tremendous amount of capital, a lot of it foolish capital that we look back on now, but just this notion when the internet starts coming around, and that anything was possible. And so we really were thinking about these just incredible cloud ideas about what it is that we could be doing at that point.
Well, I tell you, I don't know how much of your philosophy study included ethical theory, but they could use a few ethicists out there in Silicon Valley lately, I think.
Well, it's sad that we've started seeing more and more of this, which is that, you know, we could do a much better job in education, right? If we're going to wave that magic wand again at our educational system, it would be that not only would we put more talented science teachers in play in middle school, but we would put ethicists in play in our MBA programs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
How it is that you become a good citizen.
Speaking of education, let's talk about books for a second. Is there a book that our listeners may be interested in that may benefit them that you really enjoy?
The book my daughter and I are reading that's on the bedside table right now is Harari's book, Sapiens.
Love that book. Yes.
I love that. Absolutely love that book. I think it's a great book to read with a young adult.
Mm-hmm.
But his sense about our place, certainly it's a sobering read, but giving you, once again, forcing you to step back, pull the lens back, and think about the bigger trends and think about how it is. I think it's a very serious book about ethics.
Yeah.
And like we say, it's a sobering book. I enjoyed it more than the others. I enjoyed it more than the notes for 21st century, because I think everything that needs to be said, he says looking backwards, and he didn't need to sort of take the hammer out and smash my fingers.
I haven't read that one yet, but maybe the success of Sapiens was like, okay, his publisher said, well, we need some follow-ups. That one was successful. Let's have a couple more. Another good one. I think that'll be required reading for my daughter is going from 8th grade into high school next year, and one of my friends, one of the fellow parents at the school where she is now, he said, okay, here's your required reading for your daughter next year. It is Guns, Germs, and Steel, and for AP history, to get her ready for that, which is another book I love. And then I went back to him and said, that and Sapiens. I think if you read those two books, it's almost, I don't think Guns, Germs, and Steel or Sapiens were meant to be history books, but it's like the thing that I always felt was missing in my education was, how does everything fit together? Okay, I can learn some dates and places and names from the founding of the country, or, I can learn what ancient Persia was, but how does everything fit together? And between those two books, I think you get a really good sense of why are we here? How did we get here? And what are we supposed to be doing with all this stuff,
Yeah, did you read Collapse, which was his follow-on book, Diamond's follow-on book to Guns, Germs, and Steel?
I did not.
It's just every bit as good. And he looks at these civilizations that were successful civilizations, and then, of course, collapse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And why do they collapse? And, of course, he kind of leaves this blank chapter at the end, where he might as well just put the mirror in the book at the end.
Well, historians have argued about this for millennia, right? So it'll be an interesting read. And then I've seen it mentioned a few times, and I'm in a couple of history-related Facebook groups, and people mention it, and then, of course, argue about it. So I'll definitely be checking this one out, Collapse. I'll have to check that out.
The one that I've taught for years, and I've taught my share of philosophy courses and ethics courses and environmental ethics courses and those sorts of things, but is a local hero on the Kentucky side of the river, and that's Wendell Berry. And, Wendell Berry, who was this Shakespeare scholar that comes back from being a Fulbright and comes back to the Midwest and goes to the University of Kentucky, but comes back to the family farm and is thinking then on on an ecological level, once again, about how to be a global citizen. And he does a series of essays that get collected in a book called What Are People For?
Mhm.
And in there, he's got I remember when it came out, he wrote a short piece in Harper's. This was 20 years or so ago. And the article was titled, Why I'll Never Own a Computer. And it was, it got bashed as sort of this kind of love manifesto at the time, but there was a deeper lesson in there about why do we adopt the things that we adopt, and it's something that Harari hits on repeatedly when he talks about not just the intellectual revolution, but the agricultural revolution, and how, right, that wheat domesticates humans as opposed to the other way around.
I was telling my kids, if you look at the historical winners of human evolution or societal evolution, it's wheat and cows. If you just go by and chickens, I guess, copies of DNA being a measure of success, they really have domesticated us, haven't they?
The other book, I don't know if you've read, we just got done with here in our house, which was The Tangled Tree, which is a look on the Darwin side of things at a genetic level. And it sort of fits into this broader conversation about what it takes a deeper look at evolution and what counts as winners and losers and how those things get passed on at a very small level, as opposed to sort of, do you end up with flippers or fins or wings?
Yeah. Oh man, this is all interesting stuff. You just gave me like 4 books I have to go read now, and I have to figure out a way to get my kids to read them as well. What you're saying? You're reading these books with your family? Do you have like a family book club, or how do you get everybody to read these books that you're into?
The old saying that children learn to read on their parents' knee, right? Mm-hmm. Which is they see the behavior of their parents and they mimic that behavior. And I can remember before our first daughter was born, she's 10 now. And I remember just having stacks and stacks and stacks of books for her. And, she was a year old. I was already thinking about, what I wanted to read with her when she was 10 and 20 years old.
Yeah.
But it's always been a house, sometimes to my wife's chagrin, but it's always been a home with stacks of books everywhere.
Yeah.
You cannot be, I don't think you can be a good citizen of the world unless you've got a grasp of how big the world is. And the best way to get that vision, other than getting on airplanes and going and visiting all these other cultures, and that is to experience those cultures through their greatest assets, which is through their written words, through their music, through their arts, through their visual arts. And so books, as we all know, provide the greatest insight, the greatest learning tool for how it is that we expand our own vocabularies, and as well as how it is that we understand the feelings and the eyes of other cultures and other people around the world. And so for our daughters, it's just, it's always been that there are tons of books around them. The local bookstores always sort of joked whenever they see me come in that, it's like they didn't know whether I was bringing them books or taking books away, because at any given, we had more books at home than they had in the bookstore.
Almost like the Jefferson Library. At some point, you just donated to Congress, right?
Well, we should all be proud of that sort of legacy, right?
Sure.
And it does. When you think about those founding fathers and how it was, Franklin especially and Jefferson, both of them, as well as Adams, that all of them were voracious readers, and it gave them those vocabularies, those global vocabularies by which they were entrepreneurial in terms of how they approached their civic duties, as well as their entrepreneurial efforts on the business side of life as well.
Absolutely. I think okay, I could talk to you for 2 hours about the entrepreneurial side. Now I've realized I could talk to you for 4 hours about history and philosophy and ethics and things like that. I wish I had the time. In fact, if you were here, I'd invite you over to 4-Day Ray. I'm in Fishers, so that we could talk about all this stuff over a pint. But since you're not here, I'm just going to have to go ahead and wrap up and just think about all the things that you've given us to think about. I know the listeners are going to find it super valuable.
Well, I appreciate your time. I'm up that way all the time. Once again, when I'm home, I'm home. I'm hands-on here with my family. I'm at home in my art studio. I'm active in the community, but as much time then, I try and get out on the road, and I'm in Indianapolis, and I'm in San Diego, and I'm in Boston, and I'm in Europe. So, you try and do the best you can to support. It's how we started this conversation, to support those dreams and pursue those dreams.
Absolutely. I was just sitting here thinking, we try to keep it near a half an hour, and we went about 50 some minutes. I was like, maybe this will be a two-parter, but I don't know. Maybe I'll have to figure that part out. But this has been great.
Well, we'll do part 2, which is just Steve and Kyle's book club.
Yeah, exactly. The Steve and Kyle book club. I like that. How to get your kids to read more.
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe the greatest legacy that I will pass on to my children.
Do you know who James Altucher is? Have you heard
No.
him? He has a podcast. I think it's fairly popular. He was in the .com world, and what do they call it? Oh, hedge funds. He ran a hedge fund for a while, and now he just kind of writes and does a podcast and stuff. But anyway, the reason, like when you were talking about books and experiencing other cultures through books and everything, he just a couple of weeks ago on his show was talking about that, and how he said just one of the ways to gain experience without actually having to go get that experience is reading somebody's book. He's like, and he just reads voraciously. So I just thought it was interesting. I heard the same thing from two different wise people within the course of a week. So,
but I used to teach this capstone course at a local college in Jeffersonville, and the student population were they were adults that were coming back and trying to finish a degree. And I told them, what you're doing in college is you're building a bookshelf. And what I hope that you do, and in the years after you've graduated, is that you start filling that bookshelf, because that is your continuing education. And that, then I always talk to them about rights, that, a degree, we don't talk to our children about positive and negative rights, that a degree in an education provides you with positive and negative rights, and that is that you have a requirement to not be that ignorant person in the room. You have the right and the responsibility to then be that sort of enlightened person that's thinking about the global culture.
Yeah.
And you have a responsibility to share that, and to share that education. And you share it whether you're sitting on a bar stool and somebody starts going off about what's in DC or what's on news. You have that responsibility when you're sitting at the Thanksgiving table, and when you're sitting on the church pew, wherever it is. There is that responsibility. You are no longer allowed to be that ignorant person in the room. And the only way you can do that effectively is by being in touch. And being in touch means that you have to be reading. Yeah. You just have to.
And there's no excuse not to these days. People are, I'm so busy. Well, you know what? With audiobooks and Kindle and all that stuff, you're never, you always have the world's, all the books in the entire world sitting in your pocket, on your smartphones.
Absolutely. Your Kindle app on your phone, you have, and all the local libraries, you can check out ebook versions of all these things. So you can have, and you can have libraries that would have made Jefferson envious. Right at your fingertips for free. So there's no excuse. You're right. No excuse not to be.
Yeah. All right, Kyle. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, and it's time to get your weekend started. So
yeah, the Friday fish fry for me.
Oh, there you go. That sounds pretty good. All right. Well, thanks for being on the show. I look forward to us running into each other again at some point.
Absolutely, and I'm up in Indy on a regular basis, and I'm having Kristen Jones on Monday up in Indianapolis, and I'm in Bloomington next week for a startup palooza or something up there. So I'm up and about all the time.
I like the sound of that, startup palooza.
Yeah, and Elevate, is up there and right outside of Carmel. So
yeah. Before we wrap up, how can people learn more about you, find out about you, get in touch with you? What's the best route to take there?
Well, Elevate Ventures, our website, you can get to the funds, you can get access that we have submission forms there so that you can get to entrepreneurs in residence. You can get to me through that as well. You can find me, of course, on LinkedIn, and occasionally I do those other things that all the young kids are doing with an Instagram account, and occasionally even on the Facebook.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'll put links to all that in the show notes, as well as links to the books and things that you mentioned, in case people are driving or didn't get a chance to write all that down. Go check out the show notes. In the meantime, Kyle, this has been one of my favorite, certainly the longest conversations that I've had. I sure appreciate you being on the show.
Well, thank you, Steve. I love being here. I enjoyed our conversation, and to all the listeners, anything that I can do in these local communities, I'm happy to. So the door's always open.
Fantastic. Thank you.
We are very proud to have the support of the Indiana Health Industry Forum here at the Life Science Effect. They have been with us since day one. IHIF provides guidance and leadership on public policy issues that contribute to innovation in the health science sector, deliver therapies to patients in need, and further the development and growth of their member companies. IHIF also works with the government and other groups to support specific initiatives and legislation. Also, if you need a connection in the health industry, give them a call. Go to ihif.org and they will hook you up. They have been a tremendous supporter of ours, so thanks again to the Indiana Health Industry Forum. Go check out ihif.org and support them like they support our life science community.
You have just experienced the Life Science Effect. If you liked it, be sure and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And more importantly, tell your colleagues, tell your boss, tell your friends. It'll make you look smart, and maybe it'll even get you a raise. Thanks again to our presenting sponsor, BPM Associates. Set your medical innovations in motion. BPM helps life science companies design, manage, and execute their most complex projects. What effect will you cause? Thanks to today's guest and to all of our guests. Who else should I be talking to? Send me an email at steven.vincent@bpm-associates.com. That's all for now. Thanks for listening, and go make something amazing happen.